Eric Beetner, welcome to Suit Up the Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I always am curious, like, I don't judge too much, but when I see the background, especially in your case, I'm like trying to zoom in and see the titles because your background is what, when I show up to someone's house, I just want to look at the bookshelves and just scan. Like, I'm not having conversation with the host for like the first 10, 15 minutes unless they're talking about the books, in which case I'm just like, no, 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 your book's more interesting than you.
Right. Yeah, no, it's this is my little garage office. So it's literally in my garage. The previous owners had sort of built it's basically a box that sits inside my garage. So it's kind of half the size of a two-car garage, I guess is how
Hmm.
you'd say it. And this is where my wife just sort of is like, "Oh, that's good for you." And so all of my stuff. You can't see the wall. My walls are incredibly dense with part of my film noir movie poster collection.
Hmm.
So, and then there obviously piles of books, and there's my vintage paperbacks are over here. You can't see those.
Ooh.
So yeah, it is visually dense in here in a way that gives some people anxiety, but I've always liked that kind of vibe in my room. Like my bedroom in high school, I would high school was I was like super into horror films.
Hmm.
I've always been a film guy. I went to film school. I work in the industry, but I worked in a video store, so I got free posters,
Oh, sweet.
and you could not see an inch of wall space, including the ceiling. And it was
Okay.
all horror film. Like directly over my ceiling, I had a poster for Basket Case, this like really schlocky B
Okay, I've
horror
heard
movie.
of that. I've never seen
Oh,
it, but I've heard about it from a podcast, and
it's
it
it's
sounds
it's it's
horrible
it's
and
a
amazing at the same time.
Yeah, I heard the greatest description from my friend Vince Keenan recently about how to describe a movie, and I'm going to apply it to Basket Case. It's a great movie. It's not a good movie. Like it's not well made. They had like a
Mhm.
dollar 95 to make it. It looks ugly and it just feels seedy, and the makeup effects are ridiculous. But oh my God, it's so much fun when you're 16 and you just want to see the most absurd, like what's the evil twin that he keeps in a basket that, oh, yeah, okay, let's go with it. So needless to say, I did not have a lot of women coming over to my room to see
Yeah,
me.
that tracks.
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, did you have a favorite? So, did you have a favorite horror poster that you recall?
You know, I loved the poster for Halloween. I was excited when I
Hmm.
got that. The it has like a that graphic element because it has the knife.
Hmm.
If everyone remembers, it's the knife, but then they sort of transition that into a pumpkin. How the pumpkin sort of has
Yeah.
those ridges. So it was really kind of a clever design. And there's no implicit violence on it. There's no blood dripping. Like a lot of these horror
Hmm.
movies, you got to show a half dismembered body and that sort of grindhouse aesthetic. That was for a film that really is
Hmm.
playing into that sort of midnight movie aesthetic at the time in 1978. It
Hmm.
really is kind of a classy way to go with that poster, and I think it does speak to the fact that like a lot of people approached that movie at the time of like, this is just going to be a great little murder romp, and then like, oh no, this is a well crafted suspense film.
Hmm.
So that was the first one that popped to mind.
I back, I don't know, a year and a half ago, because I didn't really watch a lot of horror films growing up. I was like, okay, I'm gonna watch, because I listened to podcasts like on the slashers. And I was like, okay,
Uh-huh.
the stories behind these are just so fascinating. I'm going to give a handful a watch. And it's not really my thing. I find the stories about the films more interesting than the films themselves, but I will say Halloween specifically, I can tell it's John Carpenter and that
Yeah,
this is an amazing suspense movie because regardless of the slasher elements, it's just so terribly well crafted as a
yeah,
film. And you can feel the tension drag at
Uh,
moments where it's like just holding you on the edge.
yeah. One of my favorite movie review observations that's ever been written. Janet Maslin in the New York Times, who I think she won a Pulitzer Prize at some point for film criticism, but she had the greatest insight into that film when it first came out. She said it gets to a point where you hope someone gets killed so the
Hmm.
rhythm will change. Because
Yes.
just like you're saying, it's like it's sort of relentless, and it's also it's Carpenter's music, like all of his compositions
Hmm.
is very it's just dun dun. dun dun, and you're
Hmm.
sort of like, can you make a chord change? Can something happen because it's getting too, and it all adds up to this great tension that it's so signature Carpenter.
Hmm. I had a note that I wanted to talk to you about with film posters that I was gonna bring up later, but since we're already kind of on it,
Yeah.
so books, they say not to judge a book by its cover. Do
Mhm.
you feel like the same thing holds true to a poster in the movie?
No, I think poster art for film has always been, it's the first come on. It's the
Hmm.
first, you walk into the theater lobby, you've just paid your ticket to see something else, and now here's the coming attractions, and your eye is going to go to something like, ooh, that strikes me, or that, and I think early days, 30s, 40s, it was all about who's got the biggest name on it, and that's go, oh, I want
Hmm.
to go see the new Cary Grant film, or whatever that is. And then when you start getting into especially independent film and genre film, especially, that's when the artwork really kind of takes over as the trying to set the hook. So I think that's why, like the film noir posters that I collect,
Hmm.
the more lurid, the better. And a lot of the posters are admittedly so much better than the actual films,
Hmm.
you know? So I think, they became very effective in that, especially in the genre, whether it's horror or a lot of the sci-fi stuff, where the poster was oftentimes enough to get you to buy a ticket. And a lot of times you felt like, oh, that was a bit of a bait and switch, and that film was really not that great. But Roger Corman knew enough to say, let's give them everything they want in the
Hmm.
poster art, and as soon as they bought their ticket, not my problem anymore.
Hmm. That's one of the things I feel like we've lost more in the modern age is a lot of the movie
Yeah.
posters that come up now are just kind of bland. I
Yeah,
get
you get the
like
big
the Star
heads.
Wars effect where it's just like 12 people kind of lined up in a
Yeah.
background.
Yeah, or I think when it went photographic and like sort of scenes from the film, I
Hmm.
think is when it lost a little bit of its luster. And I hope I don't sound like a grumpy old man, but I think when it was hand painted artwork, when it
Hmm.
was original, someone interpreting it. Like there's a great poster artist named Drew Struzan who,
Yes.
yeah, like kind of the one of the names that people know,
Hmm.
like maybe they'll know Saul Bass or something like that. But Drew Struzan was like, if you don't know his name, I guarantee you he made some of your favorite movie posters of all time, because he did the Star Wars films, he did Raiders of the Lost Ark, he did Back to the Future, he did The Thing famously in like 24 hours. They gave him a deadline. So all of these things, but they're all hand painted and hand illustrated, and he
Hmm.
would sort of get a sense of what the movie was, oftentimes not even seeing the film itself, but he would come up with these, and they're sort of montages on paper where you have a couple of scenes from the film, you have some faces, you have some moments all blended together in this really beautiful artistic way. And now it's just sort of like a frame from the film.
Hmm.
And again, like how big can we get the star's name on it? And yeah, I agree with you. It's lost something, but again, I hope that doesn't just make me sound like I'm old.
Of course not, because I'm younger and I'm agreeing with you.
Okay, good.
I have the Bantam Indiana Jones paperbacks, and they
Uh-huh.
actually got him to do the cover art for those books. I wanted to get them just for that, if nothing else.
He did, and what a career that man had. Like you look at, he could have just done Star Wars and then retired, and he'd still be a legend. But yeah, you look at the list of artworks that he created. I don't know how he slept.
Hmm. One of the things that we first connected on leading up to this interview was actually the cover art for your most recent book, Real Bad, Real Soon. It
Mhm.
looks so great.
Oh, thank you.
I was commenting to my wife, we walked into Barnes and Noble, and a lot of times it just kind of looks like, especially in the what I'll say more popular fiction of like the James Pattersons, etc., all the
Mhm.
covers are just kind of blandly the same. And I love it when I see a good thriller that just has, because I've seen rom-coms have kind of started switching this way, where
Mhm.
rom-com books are starting to have more dynamic, artistic covers to them again.
Okay.
And I'm starting to see that trickle in more with good noir fiction. Obviously, like Hard Case Crime has been doing this for a while now, but
Oh, yeah.
we're getting more dynamic cover art. How much did you have to speak into that process with Level Best?
Of designing the covers.
Hmm.
For both Last Few Miles of Road and Real Bad Real Soon, those are mine entirely. I created those covers myself.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, well, I should say this. They are illustrative covers.
Hmm.
I've done probably 80% of my own books, and I've done over 100 covers for other authors,
Hmm.
for all small presses and some for favors and but I've done a ton with my very limited Photoshop skills. I will say this. But so the illustrative look on these books was a departure for me.
Hmm.
Um, and the illustrations are from websites where people put up their work and they're
Hmm.
public domain, and you can use them and manipulate them. So the illustrations themselves are from another artist, that I then took and manipulated and cropped, and I
Hmm.
I added some textures and did a lot
Yeah.
to them, and then obviously the typeset and sort of thing. Um, like the background is there.
Hmm.
The red truck is from another image, and then I was like, oh, he needs a dog in the back, so I added the
Hmm.
dog in the back. All of those little sort of layers, to create the covers. But I was nervous at first that they didn't look enough like crime novels.
Hmm.
So you'll see I put like a splash of blood on each one just to make sure that people knew what they were getting.
Oh, and that's such a
Um,
great effect too. Like
oh,
really,
thanks.
because I feel like the juxtaposition to a certain extent, where really a crime novel to, depending on the type of crime novel,
Hmm.
it's the normal world has been interrupted by blood, by
Right.
danger, by something that is a deviation from what is the defined natural rules or the defined law. So
Yeah.
having a cover where it actually does seem fairly straightforward, and then there's this aberration, this blood dripping on it, really sells, I think, the spirit of what a good crime novel should be.
Well, I'm glad that came across. Thank you. The other interesting thing was like because I did Last Few Miles of Road, and then I said, well, okay, I know this is a trilogy. I
Hmm.
know they have to be sort of a look. So
Yeah.
before I committed to that, I had to make sure that I could pull images that would match for the other two books that I
Hmm.
at that point
Yeah.
had not written yet. Just so I knew there would be a cohesive look among all
Hmm.
three. So I had the cover for Real Bad Real Soon, uh, you know, 8 months before I wrote the book, I think. And the same, the third book too. The cover is just sort of sitting there, and I finally even decided on a title. But yeah, I still need to actually finish that book.
The key, every writer's like main thing. I still need to finish that book.
Yeah,
So tell me about the Carter McCoy novels. Where did this kind of start, the seed of it?
I like writing older characters. I've
Hmm.
written slightly older people before, and I think the other thing was I like the consequences of violence.
Yes.
And it's real easy. And I think a lot of my early books were a little bit more kind of,
Hmm.
just straight ahead, like let's throw as much mayhem and chaos in there as I can. And the pages are spattered with blood. And you're limiting your audience when you do that. But,
Yeah.
I was
You're also
young.
writing to a specific audience at that point too.
Right. An audience that is very, very small. Let's just say that. But so whether it's maturity or whether it's just
Hmm.
I'm into my 30s now with my number of books. Uh,
Congratulations, by the way. That is
Thank you.
incredible.
Thank you. But so you're the search for the next idea. You worry that you're stretching the thread a little too thin, but it really
Hmm.
does all come down to character.
Hmm.
So like I can have a lot of great plots, but if I don't have the characters to populate that, I
Yes.
know it doesn't have legs to become a full
Hmm.
novel. So Carter as a person was really the first thing that came to me. I was like, well, what if there's a guy who he gets this diagnosis. It's not a surprise. It's literally page one of Last Few Miles of Road. He knows that he's dying, and he's dying
Hmm.
imminently. So that frees him now to handle this problem that he's carried with him for over 20 years, which is he wants to kill the man who was responsible for his daughter's death.
Hmm.
And I just like that idea of a man who can get into his 70s, live a good life, be a completely average citizen. He's
I
living in,
love that his past, that his like his job, he owned movie theater chains. Like that was
yeah.
his life. And I'm like, that is so, it's such a great touch, especially because it's set in Minnesota. Like
Uh-huh.
again, you've created a very normal world for this to happen in. And as someone from the Midwest, I feel like it's a very underutilized part of the world for stories to happen. Like
Yes.
stories don't just happen in New York, Chicago, and LA.
Right.
And so I always
And
appreciate seeing that.
yeah, and that's I've written about the Midwest several times for just that reason, because I think people. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, for the past 30 years, so it would be real easy for me to write an LA novel.
Hmm.
It's been done and been done better than I could probably ever do it, and B, that notion of that sort of flyover country
Hmm.
is underserved, and I think it does, like, in a weird way. You set something in Iowa or rural Minnesota, it becomes just as exotic as setting something in, Italy.
Yeah.
You know, for people who've
Including funny
never been.
accents.
Exactly. Like, if you've never been, it's just as foreign a land, I think, for a lot of people. So yeah, and I think that's the thing, is like, making him as average as possible,
Hmm.
and being from the Midwest kind of added to that. Because I think that's the other thing, is like, there's a lot of crime novels now that are set in the South, and there's a lot of
Yes.
sort of, the Southern writers that I know, they all have formed a tribe where they're like, oh,
Yes.
Southern grit lit, and they sort of
Yes.
pound the beat on that. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's all well and good, but I don't want to try to sort of bandwagon on that. And
Yeah.
again, people are doing that and doing it incredibly well.
Hmm.
I'm not going to compete with S.A. Cosby kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I wanted to write somebody who was as average as possible, and then give him this extra complication
Hmm.
that forced him to reevaluate his own life, his own morality,
Hmm.
and then do the thing, and then deal with the consequences.
Hmm.
And then also knowing that the last few miles of road is not 300 pages of him hemming and hawing, and should I do it, should
Yes.
I not. He does the deed, and then
Hmm.
there's a fallout that happens after that, because
Hmm.
again, I like the idea of consequences of violence. It's what happens to him, sort of, in his own soul. Like, what,
Hmm.
did I do the right thing? Can I do it again if it's in the service of other people? All of those questions that he has, while at the same time there's sort of this ticking clock over his shoulder. I found that really interesting, and I think it was something that also gave it legs to be more than just one book.
I 100% agree. One of the things I really enjoyed in Real Bad, Real Soon is you do deal with those consequences. And because there's a dynamic between there's the local cop and Carter,
Mm,
it's interesting to see how both of them kind of reckon with their actions in a lot of ways. And you
yeah.
see a divergence to a certain degree in just how they each choose to take decisions. And I found that fascinating. I loved the dynamic where it kind of alternated between the two of them sometimes.
Oh, good.
And the other thing that I really noted, I don't know how intentional this was, I was getting really strong shootist vibes. The John Wayne film where John
Yeah.
Wayne like has the cancer diagnosis, he's an aging gunfighter, and now he has to deal with I've survived all the shootouts, and yet is this the thing that's going to take me? Am I going to die with my boots on?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what a classic Western trope. I mean, how there's so many great Westerns that deal with that sort of, you get to the end of your life, and is this the
Hmm.
only thing I'm going to be known for, are the men that I've killed?
Which another thing I just want to quickly say, I recently had another interview where we discussed the fact that it feels like everyone's doing deconstructionist heroes.
Mm,
I think one of the things I really enjoyed about this is it does a good job of balancing. There's some deconstructive elements, but that's not the point of the story. You're still telling a fresh, innovative, interesting tale while still also questioning what are the consequences of the actions he's taking.
well, thank you. That was the intent. I mean, I it's funny because I've been tagged at various points as a noir writer.
Hmm.
I've written a bunch of westerns, most without my name on them, so they're a little bit hidden. But I kind of think of myself as a thriller writer
Hmm.
in this, and this would be a great time to mention that the first book, The Last Few Miles of Road, did just get nominated for an International Thriller Writers Award.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, it was completely unexpected, but it got nominated for Best Series Novel. And
That's
I,
awesome.
I am the underdog in that category. If you look at the other, it's like David Baldacci, Mo Gardner. I was like, okay, I'll take it.
Congratulations. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. But that my definition of sort of the difference of a thriller is
Hmm.
a story like a traditional mystery. Someone gets
Hmm.
murdered on page one. Let's figure out what happened. So
Yep.
it's a backward looking genre, which is
Hmm.
great. And I've never been able to write a book like that because I'm not smart enough to reverse engineer a murder like that. I don't have that sort of Agatha Christie brain. I'm amazed at people who do. But for me, a thriller is a book that is constantly moving forward,
Yes.
and that's what I wanted these books to be.
Hmm.
I mean, but not without their own introspection and everything. But I think that the ticking clock on Carter's life
Hmm.
automatically sort of gives the books momentum.
Hmm.
And then, like you're saying, like if it, you when I had a chance to juxtapose how he's dealing with
Hmm.
the actions of what he's done with somebody else who Detective DeFore, I think his first notion is like, well, if this old guy can do it, it's got to be pretty easy. And he finds out that that's maybe not the case.
there is I was laughing and chuckling to myself as we see Detective DeForest like unraveling through the story. And I'm like, I'm not certain how funny this is supposed to be intentionally, but it's utterly amazing because there's just enough ironic distance where I'm like, oh, you moron.
Good. I love it when people say that my books are funny or have humor. I mean, some
Hmm.
more intensely so than others, but I've never set out to write jokes,
Yeah.
but I do love a little bit of good ironic humor especially in a crime novel when you do need a little
Hmm.
bit of a release every now and then. Like you want the tension to rise and then fall and then rise
Hmm.
again. And the best way to get tension to fall is to have a good chuckle and sort of exhale and let that out.
Well, I think I messaged you my favorite line reading the book. DeFore goes to get cheese and like meats at like this local store, and it's like things were expensive either because they were local or things were expensive because they were imported. And I'm like, that is so accurate and so hilarious because I don't know anyone that has bought a charcuterie board of cheese and not seen why does all of it cost more money.
Right. Yeah, and you could justify it both ways. Be like, oh, this is locally produced with it's all organic and they have the goats on their own pro. Oh, well, that makes sense. That's going to be more. And you look and say, oh, well, this was flown all the way from France. It must be worth more. Wait a minute, what? They're both worth more.
So the irony of this is, so my day job is I work in organic certification. And
Oh
so
yeah.
I have worked with, I know the local cheese. I also work with importers. So I know the imported cheese too. And I'm like, yeah, no, this totally tracks. I'm curious, when you're talking about pacing, how much of your work as an editor do you think, because you edit in the visual medium,
Yeah.
how much of that translates into the written word for you?
So much. I think I've always said that it really is the same parts of your brain that craft a screen story
Hmm.
where my job is literally cut to the chase, I'm telling stories with a strict time clock on them. I cut
Hmm.
mostly television stuff, so I know it has to be done by
Hmm.
once we hit this time limit, it's done. So we have to
Hmm.
tell a complete story and have it make sense to the audience, keep up the pace, keep it exciting, and all that. I cut a lot of non-scripted stuff. I do a lot of competition reality stuff like The Amazing Race, and I did
Hmm.
all of Fear Factor and things like that. So that idea of pace, tension, efficient storytelling
Hmm.
is hardwired into my brain, and it absolutely comes to my writing. Also, I might be a little bit impatient. I think the books that I enjoy reading, I think anyone will gravitate towards the kind of book that they have the time to read, if
Yes.
that makes sense. Like, I think
Hmm.
if you have the time to sit and luxuriate in a book for 4 hours, 5 hours at a time, you can dig into an 800-page epic fantasy.
Hmm.
I don't have that time usually with my reading. So if I can get something that moves quickly, that doesn't linger beyond a certain page count, or or just it doesn't feel like it's being padded, or I don't need a ton of
Hmm.
backstory, and I can fill in those gaps as a reader, and I think that's half the pleasure is
Hmm.
you know filling in the tiny details yourself that you bring to it. Those are the kind of books I like to read. Therefore, they also are the kind of books I like to write. So I think it's just all tied together in my brain, of fast-paced, efficient storytelling, and let's get to it and not waste anyone's time, so we can get on to the next one and let's enjoy more stories. And
Exactly. Well, it's kind of like I remember hearing something about in movies, like the whole idea of the movie being a certain time length. The shorter
Mhm.
the movie is, the more times you can play it in a day,
Yeah,
which is the more money that it can make, which is ironic because now we just keep making movies longer and longer, so
right.
they can't play them as often. You get less ticket sales. I don't understand this concept for most movies. There are some Oppenheimer 100% earns its runtime. Maybe random B movie that no, not B movie, blockbuster film that is subpar does not need to be 2.5 hours long. Even
Yeah.
the Batman, did not need to be 2 hours 58 minutes.
Yeah. Well, and movies are a perfect example in the thing, because I always start from a place of film, and I started in
Hmm.
screenwriting, and that's just sort of where my
Hmm.
storytelling aesthetic, I think, comes
Your
from.
your stories have excellent dialogue,
Oh,
and
thank you.
I 100% love that it has a like classic movies. It has the His Girl Friday vibes, the Howard
Mm,
Hawks back and forth, the big
I'll take
sleep.
that.
I really enjoy that it moves fast paced, it's witty, and again, you don't take longer than you need to be on the page.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, I look at a 1,000-page book, and
Hmm.
anyone who, and I think the definition of like what is a novel, it's like you hand in a book that's only 45,000 words today, something that's about the length of like The Postman Always Rings Twice or Double Indemnity.
Hmm.
A publisher these days would sort of, well, it's really more of a novella, and this is not. And I get you want to get your money's worth if you're paying, $30 now for a hardcover,
Hmm.
but always tell people, like, look no further than your favorite film.
Yes.
Raiders of the Lost Ark is a complete story,
Yep.
and everyone loved it, and you identify with it, and you go back to it time and time again, and it only took under 2 hours to tell that story.
Yes.
You don't need a
So
thousand
crazy.
pages.
When I recently did a rewatch on it, my wife had never seen the Indiana Jones films,
Oh, wow.
and we started watching Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I'm like, I queue it up. I'm like, wait, this is sub 2 hours,
Yeah.
and it's so shocking because I think of all these beautiful vistas, locations. I don't feel like Spielberg ever cuts you faster than you need to be, and
No.
we're not rushing, and yet the plot is complete, the visuals are stunning, and it's just an enjoyable romp.
There's a moment in that, eventually, if my wife has her way, when I get too old to do anything, I'm going to go teach film at some small New England university. So here's my pitch to that. And one of the first things that I'm going to teach, if I teach film editing, especially, or story structure, there is a moment in the first Raiders film that is a master class in one edit of
Hmm.
efficient storytelling. Is he's just been through, it's like kind of midway through the film, he's just been through this epic scene where he almost dies and everything, and now they've lost the ark. It's been put on a truck, and now the ark is driving away. It's that silhouetted shot where he's in a tent, and they come to tell him, like, oh, the ark got away, they put it on a truck, and he just goes, what truck? Hard cut to truck on the road, Indy's pulling up. There's a massive time jump,
Hmm.
but that's all. That little moment in the tent is the breath the audience needs between this incredibly tense moment before
Hmm.
and what then becomes one of the greatest stunt action sequences in film history, where he,
Yes.
has to go under the truck and he climbs in the front and he punches I mean, that is just a masterclass in stunt action, but it's also the audience, get your heart rate back up, and you need that little pause, that little breath, but
Hmm.
you also don't need more than that. And just what truck? No one has to answer him because we already know. And it's just look at that hard cut too, and know that's what you want. Like when you get to the end of a chapter, what truck? End your chapter there. Turn the
Hmm.
page. We're already on the road. Like that's how to keep the pace up for your audience as a reader as well as in a film.
I was listening to a past interview you did, and you'd made a comment about in editing, you want to come into the scene as late as you can, and
Yes.
you want to leave it as early as you can.
Yeah. Yeah.
I,
It's an interesting
you may have
storytelling
changed the way
technique.
that I write forever. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. It's a great storytelling technique in terms of, you know, trusting the audience that you it's very hard to completely lose an audience as far as like you turn the page or like you start a scene. Okay, I'll back up. Like if you do watch the sort of the progression of this kind of efficient storytelling, if you watch, I watch a ton of sort of mid-century films. So you watch something from the
Hmm.
40s,
Hmm.
someone will leave a scene, they'll get in a car, they'll open the car door, they'll close the car door, the car will pull away.
Hmm.
Dissolve to the street, you'll see the car pull up, they'll open the door, they'll shut the door, they'll walk up the walk, they'll knock on the door.
Hmm.
All of that is unnecessary in the end. And it got to a point, you started seeing it more, it came in the like the 60s and 70s, where you would get that thing of like, we need to go talk to that guy. Yeah, you're right, we do. Hard cut to hand knocks on the door. The audience was not confused. They still know
Hmm.
what they are. That you've led them to that next cut. And I think writing wise, if you're in the revision process, I think most writers would do very well to look at those moments of, well, do I need this? And leading off with, I want to know more is a good thing,
Hmm.
rather than, well, I need to tell the audience more because they want to know more. No, they want to know more of what happens next. They don't want to know the connecting tissue between that. So I think it's again, it's that idea of like you want that chapter end to lead you to the next chapter. If you answer all the questions and get them in the car and turn the key and see them pull away from the curb, that's kind of a soft landing.
Hmm.
But if you just tighten up all of those moments, the audience will still be there. They won't be lost. They won't be confused. And you've kept up the pace in a way that they can fill in those gaps. Because I think the other thing, too, not to get too in the weeds about it, but if you think about a film, it's a series of still images,
Hmm.
and it's only the projection of those at 24 frames a second that we're filling in the gaps. We're seeing still pictures,
Hmm.
and your brain is pre-wired to fill in those gaps for that visual image, and you take it all in. So I think reading really goes a lot of the same way. Like if you're on the page and you're visualizing the story and you're understanding the character motivations,
Hmm.
if you've done a good job at that, wherever you go next, I'm in because I'm with that character.
Hmm. And to your point
Then,
earlier,
yeah,
sorry, just to your point earlier, especially in crime and noir, the plots don't need to be complicated.
right.
What you just need is a compelling character. And I
Hmm.
feel like that's where a lot of times, what I'll say, first time writers, if I see something they read, or depending on the book, the plot becomes the overwhelming thing. Or
Yeah,
wannabe writers, I meet them from
yeah,
time to time, and they're like, it's all about, oh, the plot is this, the plot is this, when the characters are nothing. Because the characters are two-dimensional, they're cutouts, they're not actually participating in the story so much as they're simply there for the story.
right. Yeah, I had a book that I got. 25,000 words into, and I realized that the female character that I had, her only purpose was to drive the plot forward and to give the male character someone to go rescue.
Hmm.
And I killed the book. I was like,
Yeah.
oh boy, she's just a cardboard cutout.
Hmm.
And so I tried to think of a way to rework, and I ended up killing the book because I was like, it's going to take too much effort to rewrite this. I'd rather start something new. Again, I could be lazy, but yeah, I think if you have three-dimensional, fully fleshed characters, they can drive you through a plot that's been done 1,000 times before. You know, someone died. Let's figure out who did it. That's that's the plot of about 8 million novels that people still love,
Hmm.
but it's all about who's the I love Miss Marple because
Hmm.
that's the thing that's dry. It's not about the murder. It's about how she deals with the murder. The stuff like that.
Hmm. Well, a perfect example actually, because I love Hercule Poirot. I am a big
Uh-huh.
fan of that. I like Agatha Christie in general, but I've never really gotten into the Miss Marple stories because Miss Marple herself as a character just hasn't always jived with me. Which is
Yeah.
no shade on the stories, the plots, or even the character. It's just I'm more interested in Poirot than I am Miss Marple. So in the
Yeah.
limited amount of time that exists, I will choose to go with the character that I enjoy, regardless of how good the other plots might be.
Right. Right. Because the plots, the plots are a dime a dozen. Especially when you get into like genre stuff, again, it's like
Hmm.
it's either someone died, let's figure it out, or someone's in jeopardy, let's save them. And you can boil all these things down to their bare essentials, and they're all pretty much the same.
Hmm. I'm curious, you said you're in your 30s writing books, like you're 30 books.
Hmm.
Do you have anything that you're doing specifically to keep characters interesting to you and keep the freshness in writing new stories?
It's trying to not repeat myself, which gets harder. Um, And I think, I'm not a fan of the notion of write what you know, and
Hmm.
I'm more write what you want to know.
Hmm.
So I've really enjoyed when I've written, female lead characters,
Hmm.
because I want to see if I can inhabit that, is
Yeah.
inhabit something that's very different from just myself. I don't want to just put myself on the page time
Yes.
and time again. That's very boring to me. And I had an agent one time who was really, really pushing me hard to write a book about Hollywood. He's like, you,
Hmm.
you work in Hollywood, and
Yeah.
this is potentially really interesting to people in the same way that everyone loves to splash on, written by a former FBI agent. And what do they
Yeah.
write about? They write about an FBI agent. And I totally get that in the
Hmm.
marketplace. And I get that you want someone to write from that place of authenticity. For me, it was like, it's like a busman holiday. I was like, I don't want to get done with work and then write about work. And also, it's like being an editor, like I love it and it's great and it's very creative. It's not the most dynamic job. Like it, people have said like, oh, can I sit and sit with you and watch you work for a little while? I'm very curious. I'm like, you can, but you're gonna be bored. Like you gotta love repetition, and it's not that exciting to watch. It's exciting in my head as I'm thinking, and oh, maybe
Hmm.
I'll put this here and craft this, and that part of it. But I didn't. I do have my one Hollywood book is as yet unsold. It's still sitting on my hard drive. But I wrote a book about stuntmen
Oh,
because
that would be so cool.
yeah, that was the first job I ever wanted in life. I wanted to be a stunt when I was about 13, 14. I wanted to be a stuntman, and I was going to go all in. And I'm still a little disappointed in myself that I never realized that dream. But
Okay, I have to ask then. I assume you saw The Fall Guy. What did you think of it?
the new one,
The Ryan Gosling movie.
I did not see it,
Oh,
and mostly because a lot of people warned me against it.
really? Okay.
Yeah, and again, like I'm older, so like I loved Hooper,
Okay,
and
I'm not familiar with Hooper. I watched the
oh,
original Fall Guy with my dad
okay.
back.
If you get a chance, Hooper is 79, 80, 81. It's
Okay.
on the cusp of the 80s. It's Burt Reynolds
Ooh.
reteaming with Hal Needham, his director from Smoking the Bandit. Hal Needham, who was a stuntman and a stunt
Uh-huh.
coordinator,
Yeah.
who turned to directing, and that's why all of Hal Needham's films are basically just giant excuses to have stunts. So
Yes.
Hooper is about a stuntman who's aging and at like 35, uh, and sort of, and he the new hotshot in town has come onto this film, and they're trying to outdo each other, and they're trying to do the biggest stunt who's ever been done, and it all leads up to this absolutely insane driving sequence. Like they're driving through this town that is collapsing around them in an earthquake. Pre CGI, everything is practical. Like there's a scene where like a 80-foot brick smokestack comes tumbling down, and they have to drive a car under it, and you get one take at this, and
Yes.
they get it's got to be 6 feet to spare under this thing, and you're just like, someone actually did that. So
That's
anyway, but
amazing.
it's again, it's a great film, not a good
Hmm.
film. Hal
Yeah.
Needham, he had his thing, so it's dated and it's cheesy, but it's Burt Reynolds, it's Sally
Hmm.
Field,
Yeah.
it's a hell of a good time. Anyway, that was the one that made me go, oh, that looks like a great life.
I will have to look up that film
Yeah,
because
it's
stunt work is the thing that I've started to appreciate more and more in movies. When we did the new Indiana Jones film when it came out, we did a these are the films that influenced Indiana Jones.
mm,
And one of the things in like the list I found online was the one of the Republic serials, like The Return of
uh-huh.
Zorro, which is not good by any stretch. It is
No,
terrible. But the
no,
stunt work, because they had Yakuma, I always pronounce his,
Yakima Canutt.
yes,
Yes,
it had him. And I can 100% see some of the stunts that he does. A, they're incredible. They're dynamic. The fights are really good. And I can see where they went. That's what the energy we want in Indiana Jones and that truck
yep,
sequence.
yeah.
I can see where they're like, oh, this one particular scene, we need to make our version of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's him going under the truck is the
Hmm.
same thing as Stagecoach when he goes underneath,
Yes.
which going under a truck is dangerous enough. Going in between two teams of galloping horses is insane.
It's and that scene is so iconic. One of my favorite movies is Maverick, directed by
Uh-huh.
Richard Donner, 1995. So much fun. But in that film, they have their version of that
Yep.
stunt where he jumps between the horses, and I'm like, it's just so good.
Yeah. 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 Stunts should 100% be an Academy Award category,
Yes.
and I'll never not be mad that it's not.
Okay, so I do have a question then on that note. If you had all power in the Academy, is there a stunt from a movie you saw last year that you think would have won the award?
Last year, I don't know. We didn't have a lot of like big actiony things. The trouble nowadays
Hmm.
is practical stunts are
Yeah,
kind of a dying art,
yeah.
which the good is people are a lot safer.
Hmm. Yes.
The good is you can do stuff that is truly epic, uh, because you can do it on a virtual set and all that jazz. The bad is there is a little bit of something lost, but I
Hmm.
think a modern sort of Gen Z audience doesn't know the difference, and
Yeah.
doesn't really notice it. Um, I look at something like, Fury Road.
Hmm.
I mean, give that movie all of the awards you possibly can because of what they pulled off. I think casting should be an Academy Award. I think
Hmm.
that's an underrated
Very
skill
much
in
so.
Hollywood that people don't understand or appreciate enough. So,
The
yeah,
MCU wouldn't have been the MCU if they didn't have the casting that they did.
yeah, it makes all the difference in your favorite movie. And that's, you talk about, like, you watch the behind the scenes and stuff. There's nothing more fascinating than, oh, did you know that Sylvester Stallone was considered for Indiana Jones? You're like, what,
Yes.
really? And just you say, what would that have been? Oh my God.
Okay, so kind of on that note, I'm curious, as a editor, I know that as a writer, at least when I read a book, I kind of think through some of the more boring the book is to me, the more I start thinking through how would I change it.
Exactly.
Do you find yourself doing that not only with literature, but also like when you're watching something, do you kind of start editing a little bit too?
Yes, it's a similar to books. When it's incredibly well done, you don't notice it.
Hmm.
And when you're fully engaged in the story, you're not having the time to break it down as you watch. I mean, I'll think about it later and sort of probably overanalyze. There are, as we talked about, most films these days, I could easily take 20, 30 minutes out of.
Yeah.
And not only would you not notice, I firmly believe that most of these films would be better.
Hmm.
So
I want the Beetner cut.
yes, I do a lot of sort of cutting. I'm like, oh boy, that scene was talky. Like and again, like I'll go back to, my first day in teaching film editing in my next life. If you I have utmost respect for Quentin Tarantino.
Hmm.
I think when his main editor Sally Menke passed
Hmm.
away, he got total final cut, and he's so in love with his own words
Yeah.
that it actually does him a disservice. And if you look at the one of the early sequence in Inglorious Bastards, when Christoph Waltz shows up at that sort of lonely farmhouse when they're hiding people underneath the floorboards, that is a great example of like you're pulling that rubber band as tight as you can, and people are on the edge of their seat and they're going, oh my god, is he going to find them? Is he going to find, we know what's going to happen if he does. Can this woman keep lying to his face? Is he going to see what the tell is? And then it pulls and it tightens and it tightens, and then it goes on for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, to it's just too long, because you reach a point where you have this sort of Hitchcockian tension, and Hitchcock was someone who knew when to get out when the getting was good.
Hmm.
And I think that is a perfect example of show to young filmmakers, like you can draw the rubber band as tight as it can possibly get, but if you don't let it snap, then all of that tension starts to dissipate, and now you're just on a thing where, like, okay, we know, when the audience knows everything there is to know,
Hmm.
and this is on screen or on the page. If we know there's people hiding in the basement, she's lying to him, he's going to kill them if he discovers it. Once we know all that, there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
So I think, as you're reading something, yeah, I get to a point where it's like, okay, he's he's chased somebody to the top of the building and they're going to have their final standoff, and I know one of these two is going to make it out alive. Okay, I don't need 20 pages
Yeah.
on that tete-a-tete, as interesting as it might be to have them square off and give each other recount the entire plot and what was your motivation for doing this, Mr. Bond, that kind of thing. That kind of stuff is what sucks the tension out for me.
Hmm. One of the last questions I have for you is, do you have a writing routine? And if so, what does it look like? And actually, I'm also genuinely curious, not just writing routine, do you have an editing routine for your books?
I don't like rewriting.
Hmm.
I like my first drafts to be as clean as they possibly can. And I am not one of these people who, you see people post online and be like, finish the first draft. Oi, what a mess. Now it's time to figure out what this thing is and try to, now I need to find the story. I look at that and it gives me hives.
Hmm.
So I'm an outliner,
Hmm.
and I am a nighttime writer. I write at night after my family has gone to bed, which is getting harder and harder the older my kids get, because they stay up later, and the older I get, because it gets harder and harder. But I like sort of no distractions, no,
Hmm.
and I've never been a morning person my entire life, so I'm not one of these. Oh, I'll get up at 5 a.m. before everyone else. That's never going to be me. So by the time I sit down and it's been a full day and I've worked a job and you've done all the things, I have 60 to 90 minutes maybe of sort of focus and brain power left. So when I
Hmm.
do sit down to write, I'm very focused. I'm very efficient at it. I can get, 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 words out in that time
Hmm.
because I know exactly what I'm doing. I constantly move forward. I don't look back and edit the day before. I don't look back at anything until I've reached the end.
Hmm.
So I'm not rewriting as I go, but I know my beats. I know
Hmm.
what comes next and what my motivations are and all that kind of stuff, so that I'm not, I'm not finding the story as I go. So that's the biggest thing for me is just when I do have that time, because I know it's limited, I want to know exactly what I'm going for. And word count be damned. It's like, as long as I'm pushing the rock a little bit further up the hill, then it's a good day. But
Hmm.
I like to finish a thought also. Like I don't like to leave off, an action scene
Hmm.
midway. I find it hard to sort of get back into that same mindset. So I like to finish a scene or finish a chapter, and then I know, okay, that's a day well spent. I've done my job. Now, when I pick up tomorrow, I can sort of pick up on a new thought and finish that thought. And that serves me well.
Hmm. I always find it fascinating just to see how different people's routines work.
Yeah,
And obviously, the most important thing is always consistency, but there's such a wide variance between the plotters and the pantsers sometimes.
yeah,
And knowing what you are going to write helps you just immediately leap into it.
yeah. I think so. But
Eric,
and again, I have so much respect for the people that can do it the other way, if they
hmm,
can do it and pull it off and have it not be evident on the page. I do
yes.
read a fair amount of books where I'm like, oh, this is a pantser. Because it's sort of like, it's sort of going over here and then it's going over here, and then you can sort of
Hmm.
feel it lock in, and I'm like, oh, all right, I think I know what's going on here. It
Well,
doesn't always make it like a bad book or anything, but I
yeah,
I feel like I can tell. Maybe I'm just full of it, but
I don't understand. I've always been like the middle of the road person. I like to know what my story beats are, and then I kind of just fill in the gaps
yeah,
very loosely as I'm
yeah,
going.
yeah.
But
My outlines are skeletal.
when I read like that Lee Child says he doesn't plot at all, he basically just discovers the story as he's going. I'm like, more power to you. I have no
Yeah,
idea how that's possible.
yeah.
Go figure out your complicated plot over there.
And it's the rewriting and revision process that is where that all that hard work comes in. I feel like I'm doing, we're all doing the same work. It's just, do you
Hmm.
do it up front or do you do it at the back end? I prefer to do it up front.
Hmm. Which again, the quality speaks for itself. I really
Okay,
enjoyed Real Bad Real Soon. People should definitely check it out. Where can
thank you.
people go to learn more about you and your work and your books?
Well, I have my website, ericbeetner.com, which I need to update more regularly. But I'm on all the socials. I'm not on X anymore because of reasons.
Hmm.
But Instagram, Facebook, Blue Sky, just at my name, at Eric Beetner. And I try to post regularly about updates about the book, but then a lot of other fun stuff. Fair warning, I do get political. I'm very liberal and deal with that, but I'd like to protect democracy a little bit as I do with these other things in life.
And also, what can people do to support you for the thriller contest, the award? Is there anything people can do?
No, it's all voted internally, and I've been a judge for ITW in past years. Mostly, I've done the short story category several times, so I know that by the time the nominations come out, the numbers have all been crunched, and the winner's already decided. We just won't find
Hmm.
out until June.
Okay.
But it's all voted on by, it's a peer voted
Yeah.
award, which makes it super gratifying to know that I don't know who the judges were for that category, but somebody who is a professional author in this business read my book along with all of these other super heavy hitters and thought it was good enough to include in that short list of six. I was completely stunned and incredibly honored. And I hope it lets people find Carter McCoy, who otherwise might not have.
Hmm. Well, link all of that in the show notes. Thank you so much again for coming on the show, Eric.
Thanks for having me. This was fun.